Christopher Nolan's adaptation of The Odyssey has been raising some eyebrows since its announcement. However, in the last few weeks, it seems that all the grifters on YouTube have tackled it, making it their pet project now that their audience cares less about Star Wars and more about prestige art adaptations of millennia-old poetry.
Zendaya is in this movie as Athena, the goddess of wisdom.
Lupita Nyong'o is the most beautiful woman in the world, and a 5-foot female transvestite is the strongest warrior ever to live.
It's a bit odd with The Odyssey that Christopher Nolan, the big daddy of Hollywood, is playing the Hollywood game.
However, it seems to me that a lot of these grifters might be biting off more than they can chew, especially with their repeated talking points across every single one of their videos. This was originally going to be a response to just Michael Knowles, but when watching more of these videos, I realized all these guys have the same talking points, so let's talk about all of them at once, because if you respond to one, you respond to all of them at this point. Now, to clarify, I'm not saying they stole the writing from each other, but they do seem to have the same general talking points reiterated in different configurations. Different angles, same perspective.
The man known for grounding things even with the wildest concepts. The guy committed to realism and technical craftsmanship goes full Netflix. From the same global entertainment industry that gave us Black Cleopatra, Black Little Mermaid, Black Anne Boleyn, Latina Snow White, Black Female Dwarves, Black Elves, Black Female Viking Queen Jarl Hakon, and Black Snape. We get Black Helen of Troy, who is originally from Sparta, and I would expect this from the rest of Hollywood, but not from Chris Nolan.
From the team that brought you Why is Snow White Latina? Why are there black people in the Rings of Power? And Star Wars has gone woke comes the latest online onslaught against an anticipated Hollywood project that has committed the unfathomable sin of having a diverse cast. Well, I have a lot to say about this article and about the controversy, but first of all, we have to ask, how did all that turn out for all of the projects that you just listed, huh? Are they doing well? Is Disney succeeding? Just asking questions.
The Odyssey is obviously the classic epic poem written by the poet Homer. It was originally part of a 6-poem cycle, but only 2 of those remain to this day, that being the Iliad and the Odyssey. And when listening to these grifters talk, I don't think they've actually read the Odyssey. Hell, in some cases, I'm not even sure they've even seen trailers for the movie. Watch this clip from former Daily Wire Snow White copy, Brett Cooper, for a second here. Listen to what she says.
As the trailers started coming out and the little teasers for the Odyssey, people also started nitpicking Christopher Nolan's costume design. So, for example, in this image and clip, you see Agamemnon, who was wearing black armor. And I saw that, and I was like, okay, that looks cool. I didn't really think anything of it, but some people were not happy about this. Like one person tweeted, you have 2 kinds of people upset about the historical accuracy of the new Odyssey movie. There's the ones who are very upset about black people being in it, but not so much the white people. And then you have the people upset that they didn't go with the tin can armor that they had back then, who is me, is what this girl is saying.
Okay, caught that? Because that's not Agamemnon. That's Odysseus. This is the guy she's talking about. That's Odysseus. How do you confuse the two? One has an outfit that looks like Batman. They're in the same trailer. I know you had to have seen the trailer or at least reactions to it. So how do you conflate these two things? Did you even watch the trailer? Right off the bat, I gotta tell you this right now. I have issues with how Christopher Nolan is approaching the Odyssey. I don't think Nolan is a good fit for epic fantasy at all. His sci-fi illustrates he wants to operate under very technical rules. When you watch Inception, for example, can you imagine waking up in your homeroom class without your pants on? Can you imagine Freddy Krueger walking through? Does it feel like David Lynch could make this? No, because Nolan's dreams are structured. They have order. Everyone wears a suit. Everyone operates within the laws of physics, just twisted physics to some degree. The best we get is a folding city, and even that is very literal and very technical. The best parts of Interstellar, I think, are the parts that adhere most to the very technical rules established by Nolan. However, fantasy does not always have such technical rules. Yes, they are hard magic system. However, that's not really the same thing as hard sci-fi, which operates under very technical limitations. You can quantify it. You really can't quantify magic all that well, especially in the Odyssey, where gods and monsters operate with very little in terms of rules and limitations. Ergo, it already seems odd. Now, the trailers seem to focus more on Odysseus' journey home, the trials with Penelope and his son at home, and the suitors trying to pursue Penelope now that Odysseus is away. That does feel more like Nolan, I think. But, again, they are legit criticisms about the Odyssey that get muddled in with the grifter nonsense. For example, the lack of historically accurate armor and weaponry. A lot of the armor looks like it's from Batman. Yeah, that's not accurate. But then again, the Odyssey wasn't accurate. The Odyssey, you have to understand, is not history. It is not even mythology, it's a story. A story told and retold time and time again by the ancient Greeks. Homer is not the only ancient Greek who wrote about Trojan War. If you read the Greek plays, they talk about the Trojan War a lot. The myths, the legends, other writers outside of Greece wrote about the Trojan War and took liberties therein. Therefore, we should not treat the Odyssey as a work of history or even a work of religion or mythology. It's a story. And stories get reinterpreted constantly. Even in the days of Homer, they were reinterpreted a lot. And so we cannot take it as totally literal. However, the Grifter's arguments are not really about armor or about him adhering to some rules, especially when Cyclopses and Sirens and Xerxes show up. No. The big issue is casting. Which, yeah, casting is a concern. The fact that none of the actors in the movie are Greek is a little weird, considering it's a story about ancient Greece, or Turkish, because Troy was believed to exist somewhere around Turkey, so there should be more Middle Eastern actors, there should be more Greek actors. Have doubts? Well, listen to Brett Cooper herself say it again. The weakest link here is the one who yaps the loudest about the actual message of what's going on. Cooper boils it all down to it being a preference of people's, who gets cast and who doesn't.
They were upset because none of these actors are actually Greek. But here's the thing, this is the way that I view it. Christopher Nolan, because of his standing in Hollywood, he can cast whoever he wants. I mean, he is the most sought after director in Hollywood, literally. Like, everyone in Hollywood literally fights to get cast in his movies. If he wanted to do all Greek, he could. If he wants to make a crazy diverse cast, he can make that happen. And everyone in the industry is kind of like, we just let Christopher Nolan be Christopher Nolan. And listen, like, I am not here getting my panties in a bunch about stuff, but I agree, like, an all Greek cast would have been incredibly cool, especially because if there is anybody in Hollywood who has the sway to pull that off, who could, put together a cast of essentially nobodies, like, up-and-coming Greek actors that he has discovered. If anybody could put that together and still get butts into theaters, still get them to come out to support an amazing film, it would be him, just because of the pull that he has in Hollywood and with audiences. So, was going with all of these A-listers the lazy or easier route? Sure, I would argue it was a lot more expensive, so I don't know if it was the better route, but you could say that. But I don't really care. It's Christopher Nolan. He's gonna do what Christopher Nolan wants to do, but a lot of people really did care.
Her complaints, though, about leftists being upset by casting is interesting, considering her sole leftist she cites is a guy with a Templar avatar. That's very liberal and left-leaning, I feel like. Still, for her to chalk down the casting concerns to just a preference, well, what makes our preferences any better than yours? At that point, you're not anchoring it in specifics with talks about accuracy, you're just admitting it's a preference. So, what preference do you have against these actors in particular? Still unconvinced? Well, Nerdrotic opens up his video by completely mocking an expert on history, completely offhand without hearing out the evidence correlating to it.
This idea was also explored in a book called Black Athena. I think people should read it, which argues that classical Greek culture is heavily indebted to Afro-Asiatic and Near Eastern roots. I actually taught Greek mythology to 8th graders. And so I covered this.
Fun fact.
So people that are saying that Helen of Troy could not possibly be played by a Black woman don't know history.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Nerdrotic.com.
Now, when Nerdrotic dismisses Black Athena, it's offhand without actually looking at the text. When I dismiss Black Athena, it's because they use no actual archaeological evidence for their claims. We are not the same here.
So when some of the questionable casting of the Odyssey was announced, Christopher Nolan got something that he earned but Hollywood doesn't deserve, the benefit of the doubt. And let's face it, most of the casting is pretty good. Now, Matt Damon isn't anyone's first choice for Odysseus, but he's not bad. Tom Holland, Robert Pattinson, Anne Hathaway, John Bernthal, Mia Goth, James Remar, and even Charlize Theron, because the more time she spends on a set filming a movie is the less time she spends adopting children and changing them. But after that, it gets pretty bad. Let's face it, when people are overlooking Zendaya playing Athena, you know you're in trouble.
I have never seen a single Zendaya performance in my life and thought, oh my god, she absolutely carried this movie. Tell me, what's your favourite Zendaya expression? The angry frown? The confused frown? Or the confused angry frown?
Yes.
Across the board, a lot of these critics mention Zendaya's performance as Athena as a point of contention. However, they always neglect to actually hone in on that. They just say it as though it's a given that it's a bad thing. But why do they not focus on that too much? Well, probably because Zendaya is very popular and very liked. They know they can't grift off the name Zendaya because people generally like her, and she's done extremely well in movies like Dune. Their grift against Dune failed last time they tried complaining about Zendaya, so they're not even going to bother this time. However, we both know exactly who they're most obsessed about with this movie.
No, 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 don't do it!
Has Christopher Nolan totally lost it? Is this crazy? Someone posted to Twitter, there are all these funny memes going around of if the Odyssey marketing were honest, and it says the Odyssey, and the three characters at the top are Page, Lupita Nyong'o, and Travis Scott, the rapper who apparently plays like a Roman poet or something. Let's just focus in on the most controversial choices here.
Lupita Nyong'o is widely rumoured to be playing the Greek princess Helen of Troy, which if it turns out to be true would make about as much sense as Papa Asuido playing Severus Snape, but hey, what can I say?
It's Hollywood, baby.
Thank you, Rachel.
Helen of Troy is a demigod in the original mythology. She is regarded as the most beautiful woman in all of Greece, if not all the world. The Trojan War is fought because Paris of Troy takes Helen and brings her to be married to him in Troy. It's a whole war fought over a woman. Lupita Nyong'o is an extensively celebrated actress. She won an Academy Award for portrayal of a slave in 12 Years a Slave.
It doesn't escape me for one moment that so much joy in my life is thanks to so much pain in someone else's.
And after depicting a role that embodied black pain, decided to just play any role she damn well wanted to. She's been in blockbusters left and right, from Star Wars to Black Panther, as well as, I think, her best performance, Us, where she plays two versions of herself in a fantastic Jordan Peele film. However, now we're getting people arguing Lupita Nyong'o is not right for the role of Helen of Troy because she's not white. Of course, who started the controversy? While all these people have the same talking points, it's surprising how, after a certain post was made on Twitter, how hard they all went against Nyong'o. I mean, I think Critical Drinker's post was before that, and it's less intense about Nyong'o than those made after this post.
So, obviously, Lupita's role being announced sparked a frenzy on X. For example, Matt Walsh posted, "We're told that we shouldn't object to Helen of Troy being portrayed as a black woman, and yet if a major Hollywood studio made a film set in Africa and cast a white woman as the most beautiful woman in Africa, those same people would literally riot in the streets. If, say, Sydney Sweeney was cast in the role, they would be driven to murderous violence. We all know this is the case." And he's not saying anything that is inaccurate, like that is a fact, especially when it comes to Sydney Sweeney, who they long have called a Nazi now. And then Elon Musk responded to Matt's tweet and said, "Absolutely true, such hypocrisy in Hollywood." And like from there, Elon just let it rip. Post after post talking about this, saying Nolan was just trying to get an Oscar, so he was, filling his diversity quota, all of these things, talking about how idiotic this casting choice was.
So what did Helen of Troy look like? Well, contemporary art at the time depicted Helen of Troy as dark-haired and dark-skinned. But that also being said, the art that we're showing depicted everyone as basically a shadow person, so that's not exactly anything to go by, is it? There are 2 points in the Iliad that describe Helen of Troy's appearance. One is often translated as having blonde hair, and the other is often translated as having white arms. However, there is a massive catch to this. Let's start with the hair. The word that is used to describe Helen of Troy's hair originally is xanthos. Xanthos means bright, luminous, and shiny. While some translators conclude this must mean blonde, that's not necessarily true. It just means the hair is luminous and bright. Some translators take this as blonde, but the term has also been used to describe brown hair. But what about the white arm description? That seems pretty concrete, right? Well, no, because this is an idiom. Idioms are incredibly hard to translate because they are phrases that do not literally mean what they say they do. It's a term that refers to anyone of noble or divine birth, and Helen of Troy is a demigod, as well as royalty. It can also be referring to untanned arms, which is a reference to those who do not labor in the fields and get sunburned, which again ties it to nobility who is not toiling away in the fields. Does anything what I just said mean Helen Troy's black? Well, probably not. But who cares? It's a story. It's not history, it's not literal, it's a story. And the best actress for the role will get cast as the character. And there are very few actresses as beautiful as Lupita Nyong'o, who also can act to the caliber that Nolan expects. That's the thing too. There are a lot of beautiful actresses in Hollywood, but arguing that, say, Sydney Sweeney should be Helen of Troy, well, that's pretty odd, isn't it, considering Sydney Sweeney does not look Greek at all. She looks more like Swedish, which is not Greece, and was not regarded as the height of beauty in ancient Greece. Hell, if we're being perfectly blunt about it, Lupita Nyong'o also does not embody the ideals of Greek beauty because she is too thin. A lot of Greek beauty was more full-figured, because if you could feed yourself through the winter, you were regarded as more beautiful. Can you imagine if they cast like a fuller figured actress for Helen of Troy? How pissed off these grifters would be? Because again, that's more accurate to the ideals of beauty at the time. How does casting Helen of Troy as a black woman fundamentally alter the film's story? It really doesn't, considering that Helen of Troy is the motivation of the characters in the Iliad. The Iliad, which takes place before the Odyssey, because the Odyssey takes place after the Trojan War. It does reference the end of the Trojan War, sure, but Helen of Troy isn't exactly a prominent character in the Odyssey. She's major in the Iliad, but even then, in the Iliad, she's also barely present. Anyone who's actually read the original poems could tell you Helen of Troy is an object of the story, but she's not a character within them. She is the goal to save and rescue in the Iliad, but not the Odyssey. And it's important to emphasize this, because Nolan is not adapting the Iliad. He is adapting the Odyssey, which is about Odysseus traveling home after the war has already ended. So Helen is barely a presence here. But even less of a presence in the Odyssey is Achilles. And Achilles is another figure that has gotten a lot of controversy through the Grifterverse recently. Because Achilles, it is rumored, will be played by Elliot Page. Mind you, even prior to the rumor that he was playing Achilles, they were already grifters trying to grift on Elliot Page's presence.
Elliot Page is also in this movie. As what exactly? I don't fucking know. A drummer boy, maybe? Page is like 5 feet tall and weighs 90 pounds soaking wet, so I don't really see how they're gonna fit in amongst all those big Greek soldiers and terrifying monsters.
But bizarrely, him playing Achilles didn't really change what they said, though they did kind of reveal they don't understand who Achilles was in the original text.
A 5-foot female transvestite is the strongest warrior ever to live.
The right is calling out Christopher Nolan for race swapping and the very odd, interesting choice to cast Elliot Page. Elliot Page, allegedly, as the great warrior Achilles.
There seems to be some confusion about why Achilles was the greatest warrior in the Greek army. It was not due to his strength. In fact, Achilles is the child of sea nymphs, not demigods like Hercules or Perseus. No, he is indestructible because his mother dipped him in the river Styx by his ankle. That's why his heel is his weakness, the only part that's vulnerable. Hit that and he goes down. Achilles is powerful because he's indestructible, not because he's necessarily particularly strong. Elliot Page is, of course, a trans mask actor. He has worked with Nolan previously in Inception, which I think is one of Nolan's better works. Nolan often likes working with actors he's had previous success with across his films. So it makes sense Elliot Page would show up again in Nolan's filmography because they've worked together before. It's also, I want to emphasize, an incredibly minor role. By the time the Odyssey takes place, Achilles has been long dead. But also, I find it very peculiar that Achilles is the character the Grifters are so upset about, considering that Achilles is, there's no way, you know what, there's no way to put this bluntly. Achilles is one of the gayest characters in all of Greek mythology. If Achilles was born in the 60s, he wouldn't have just thrown the first brick at Stonewall, he would have thrown his entire head at the cops in Stonewall. Achilles is a flaming homosexual. His entire story in the Iliad is him obsessing over his boyfriend and moping that his boyfriend doesn't pay attention to him. Achilles cross-dresses in myth repeatedly, more than once. Achilles is not your heterosexual icon you need to defend. Achilles is so well known to be gay, for Patroclus specifically, his lover, combatant, best friend in the world, that the Song of Achilles basically just takes the text of the Iliad and just makes what's not at all subtext more overt. Mind you, back in ancient Greece, it was more masculine for men to be in the company of other men. Therefore, who better to play Achilles than Elliot Page? I don't think you understand the story if you're upset by anyone from the LGBTQ community playing Achilles. Is Elliot Page my first casting choice? Probably not. Could he do a good job? Absolutely. The guy's an accomplished actor who's been around for decades. And quite frankly, I think Elliot Page is in better shape than most people who go complaining about Elliot Page's casting. So yeah, he's probably better equipped to play the role anyway. We have to contend with the fact that they cannot explain why Elliot Page is bad for the role of Achilles. Is it acting ability? Is it potential for performance? No. It's just the fact he's trans. That's the only element they're drawing objection to. It's telling how all the comments demasculate Elliot Page whenever they talk about him. Either they talk about how small he is, or they just outright dead name him like Michael Knowles does throughout the entire video. In fact, that's one reason I haven't shown many clips of Michael Knowles, because he consistently just dead names him every chance he gets. It's almost as though the cruelty of dead naming him is the point of the commentary. He's definitely proven himself as an actor. I mean, you ever see Hard Candy? That role's fucking incredible. He nails that role. He was great in Inception. He's great in Umbrella Academy. This guy is a time-tested actor who can play a physical role. Hell, it's not even the first superhero he's played. However, there is one odd criticism I haven't addressed yet that reoccurs across these multiple videos.
Problem is that the Odyssey was originally written in ancient Greek, obviously, meaning that it has to be translated into English for it to be legible, and what kind of story you ultimately get very much depends on which translated version you read. In this case, Christopher Nolan has publicly stated that he's a big fan of the 2017 adaptation of the Odyssey, which was translated from Greek by British writer Emily Wilson. Why exactly does that matter? Well, because Emily Wilson just so happens to be a hardcore progressive feminist who specifically set out to reimagine Homer's text through a female-coded, gender-critical, postmodernist lens. Because of course she did. Basically stretching the very limits of the original text to bend it around modern sensibilities. It's the same kind of creeping, cloying, well, I think what he really meant to say here was bullshit that gave us 2026's Animal Farm, a story that went from a parable about the Russian Revolution to a ridiculous, shallow, capitalism bad piece of Hollywood slop. That is the version we're likely to get here with all its gender identity navel-gazing.
Yet in their videos, they didn't exactly explain why it was somehow progressive. Well, I decided to look into the translation and tell you exactly what's different about it. And what I found, oddly enough, is it's the opposite of progressive. It actually goes back to the original text far more than previous translations had. You see, in the 18th century, Alexander Pope elevated the text of the Iliad and Odyssey to be grand, ornate, elevated. However, the problem is, in that process, he changed key points of language throughout the writing, and other translators since then have followed Pope's lead over a return to the original ancient Greek text. What Wilson did was go back to that original text and preserve the language and meaning as much as she could, while also adhering to an iambic pentameter, kind of drawing a connection between Homer and Shakespeare in the process.
The point is to create an equivalent experience to the experience that I might have if I'm a fluent reader of Homer, or that a reader or a listener in antiquity might have hearing these poems. And that's going to include the vividness of this really does evoke those feelings in a way that, of course, is in some ways totally non-naturalistic. As I said before, it's in this traditional poetic form, it's in this weird language that no one spoke, and yet at the same time, there are things that feel visceral and real, like the feelings, like the sounds.
In other words, she prioritized the readable language of Homer's original as opposed to the elevated stance taken by modern translations around her. And by modern, I mean the last 300 years of translations. In short, Wilson's translation is not progressive, but a return to the original form, and as such, preserves Homer's language as best as possible.
Is the possibility that this film is based on Emily Wilson's 2017 translation of Homer's Odyssey through a feminist lens, something the professor of classical studies Emily Wilson kind of denies, because we all know feminist activist academics are some of the most objective people in the world. I didn't want to be in any way untruthful or irresponsible about what the original text is saying or doing. I tried to think as much as I could about how my own identities and histories might affect my interestedness in the poem as a woman and as a gender-aware feminist.
Well.
Wilson's translation is more closely aligned to the original text than the version that inspired all modern translations of this book, meaning that every single thing that they are telling you about Emily Wilson is complete horseshit.
There's a reason movies like this traditionally use theatrical English and formalized language for their dialogue. It gives them a sense of grandeur, seriousness, and dramatic weight that naturally lend itself to the epic story they're trying to tell. Having your actors talk like they just walked in off the street in downtown LA just feels weirdly lazy and immersion breaking. And before anyone chimes in with little pearls of wisdom like, "Drinker, you know as well as I do they would have spoken Greek in a story like this, so why does it even matter what accents they use?" Well, hypothetical straw man, we all know the language they would have spoken, but we also know that having your entire cast learn a whole new language just so the audience can sit through 3 hours of subtitles is neither practical nor logical.
What Drinker is defending here is the Pope translation, the more elevated, lofty language used in modern translations. Nolan is clearly drawing from Emily Wilson's lead with her translation. However, unlike Pope, Wilson wrote soldiers talking like soldiers, crass, blunt, not elevated, not sophisticated, just people. And that humanity does manage to humanize and communicate the ideas of the story to the audience. I at first was a little hesitant on how blunt the language was in the Odyssey trailer, but the more I sit with it, the more grounded and human it does come across. It doesn't come across as artificial, as inhuman, as pseudo-Shakespearean. It comes across as people talking, and that's kind of important with a story, because they're about, ultimately, people talking. It brings a story about gods and heroes down to earth. And once I realized that Christopher Nolan may be the best person for the Odyssey to anchor this fantasy and epicness to a human scale. And I realized I had to reevaluate what it was I was even looking for in this story. He maybe understood the humanity of Odysseus more than many other storytellers have. Why is it they're fighting so hard over the Odyssey? What about this movie is so potentially offensive to them that they're this defensive of the movie? I think the best adaptation of the Odyssey is O Brother, Where Art Thou?, which completely changes and recontextualizes the whole story. There's nothing in there remotely like the Greek story, except for the entire story itself and the structure it follows. But they change everything, but it's still identifiable. Recently, Epic the Musical proved to be a fantastic adaptation of the Odyssey storyline, and all the characters are played by the same 2 or 3 people. It's all the same people singing all the roles, and yet, it's still a great adaptation, because it captures the spirit, the emotions, and the vibes of what's happening throughout the story. It's also done in a musical style that's completely unlike ancient Greek music. What about the casting of two characters, both of whom are not present all that much in the Odyssey, matter? It's because it's easy to point at.
Is this crazy? Someone posted to Twitter, there are all these funny memes going around.
A decision that has earned the label the AWDEIC, and it's got everyone scratching their head and asking Christopher Nolan, what the f*** are you doing?
The people who are often presented as being alternatives to Helen of Troy, like Sydney Sweeney, she came from a region that the Greeks hated. Titus Andronicus is a play written by Shakespeare, where the Romans come to an agreement with their enemies, the Goths. The Goths refer to people north of ancient Rome, which at that time included Germany, Norway, and Sweden. And they're treated as tasteless, cruel, ugly, savage monsters. In the world of ancient Greece, Sydney Sweeney would not be the height of beauty, she would be an object of revulsion. They would hate her. They would be disgusted by her. The very thought of her would make them nauseous because they'd associate her tall, lean body and blonde hair and blue eyes with savagery, with monstrous behavior. This is an element of the mythology and culture you're not taking into account because you're not looking at the Odyssey as a work of ancient Greek literature. Our perspective of what counts as a savage and a beautiful goddess are very different now than they were when the Odyssey was written. Even the idea of a hero is different because a hero was not the same thing then as it is now. Heroes were not selfless. They did not always fight for the greater good. They just committed great acts that changed the course of history. The Odyssey as a work is thousands of years old, and much like King Arthur, it has been retold and reevaluated for centuries now. These grifters are acting like it's a concrete novel written in the last 100 years, with continuity and lore that has to be adhered to. But even the Greeks changed the rules on a regular basis. And you know what the funny thing is? None of your whining is going to change the fact that all of you nerds are going to see it opening weekend.
If you go over to the Odyssey trailers, they are overwhelmingly liked. The IMAX showings were sold out a year in advance. Based on what I've seen with anybody else, I think this would be most surely a dumpster fire, but I don't know. It's tough to bet against Nolan.
You're all going to pay money to buy tickets. You're all going to watch it. So shut the fuck up about it if you really are that upset. If you really are that offended by the Odyssey, don't go watch it. That's my bet. Don't watch it. Let's see you protest it. You don't like the casting? Don't go see it. You don't have to. You can't write a review about it though because you haven't seen it. You can't rage bait people after it's all out because you haven't seen it. But you stuck to your morals and you didn't watch it. Good. Don't watch it. Or you could be open-minded to something a little different. You can see a version of a story that's been retold thousands of times at this point in a different light. Or hell, you know what? The Hallmark adaptation is still there for you. And that's pretty faithful to the text and probably what you're looking for. And the Hallmark version is online right now. Go and watch it. It's free and it was made a few decades ago, before all this culture war nonsense started. So be content with that, or just rewatch Oh Brother We're Out There. Actually, Oh Brother We're Out There. Listen, grifters, even if you're watching, if you got this far, we can all agree Oh Brother We're Out There is pretty damn good, right? That's a good fucking movie. We all agree on that? Good. I'm going to watch The Odyssey, but I myself am already critical of it. But for reasons different than you are critical of it. We'll see who's right. I would love to be wrong, but we'll see.